Hello, my name is Dan Johnson and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing something completely new and I'm going to be doing a trend, and that trend was the 100 tag. You may have seen this a couple of years ago. In fact, you may have even seen this on my own channel, and that's because I did it before. Maybe even before COVID, but I feel like it was probably about 2020 in fact. And quite a while ago I realised that I wanted to do it again because I looked at that video, hated a lot of my decisions and the way it was presented, but my understanding of Classic Who was awful. I think at one point I said that Spearhead from Space was the one with the chair that kills people, which is just wildly incorrect. So after I gave myself the ick over myself, I thought I can redo that, I can present it a lot better, and now I have a better understanding of Classic Who because I've watched more episodes, but there are now more episodes to talk about. If you don't know, the 100 tag originated on YouTube by, I think, the Whoniversals, and they developed the idea that BBC headquarters, the archives of the stored Doctor Who episodes are about to be wiped. There's a fire or catastrophe or whatever, and every episode of Doctor Who is about to disappear. Your task is to go in and collect as many as you can, but you can only take 100. It is probably worth noting that a serial counts as one, so you cannot take the Daleks' master plan as one slot. It counts as 12, although you don't necessarily need to take every single episode with you, which means that if you want to cut out the Feast of Stephen, for example, then it becomes 11 slots. We have exactly 100 episodes across New Who and Classic, so let's begin. We're first going to take An Unearthly Child, but we're not going to take the entire serial because that thing is quite boring after part 1. We're only going to take the first episode. It beautifully sums up the show, the premise, and it's an incredibly historical story, so we're just taking part 1.
Of course, next we're going to need a Dalek story, and I decided to take Dalek Invasion of Earth over the original story, The Daleks, and that is because I feel like it's a fuller story. We also have the departure of Susan here. Although it is quite a large story, I've decided to only take 5 parts and cut out episode 1. We don't need 25 minutes of the Doctor and gang walking around an old studio. I considered perhaps taking a historical story like the Romans or the Aztecs, but I decided that at the end of the day, what you really want is the first appearances of iconic villains, so I decided to skip straight to the end of Hartnell's run, sadly, and take the 10th planet. It is, of course, the first regeneration story, the first appearance of the Cybermen, but to save a little bit on numbers, we're not going to take episode 1.
The poor second Doctor does not feature a lot in my list. The issue I had was that a lot of the stories I wanted to take with me were quite big. I wanted to take the invasion, a little bit of the war games, for example, the mind robber, etc. I mean, the mind robber is only 5 parts, which was probably a bad example, but there wasn't many stories that I feel could be cut short. So I've decided to take just one full story, and that full story is Tomb of the Cybermen. I think it's just a brilliant second Doctor episode. It's an essential Doctor Who episode. Patrick Troughton gives a beautiful performance, the Cybermen are brilliant, and of course it has some really iconic shots. And the only other episode that I've taken with me is an episode of the War Games, so it only takes up 1 slot, and that is going to be episode 10. It's because it shows off the Time Lords and the whole forced regeneration stuff. I think is a really neat concept, and of course it's a regeneration story, so incredibly important there.
Arguably, we've taken too much John Pertwee, but I really struggled to cut it down. So we start off with Spearhead from Space, the first story of the 3rd Doctor. First one in colour, a beautiful episode, and I'm taking all 4 parts of that. Then we skip to season 8, and we take one of the most popular stories, Terror of the Autons. It's the first appearance of Jo, but most importantly, it's the first appearance of the Master. And of course, if you're talking about big moments, you have to take Doctor Who's 10th anniversary in the form of the 3 Doctors. At a push, I fit in the final 3 episodes of The Time Warrior, which I feel is very definitive Doctor Who, but also happens to be the first appearance of Sarah Jane Smith and the Centaurans. But it's also a cracking script from Robert Holmes.
And now we move on to the 4th Doctor era with a very iconic story, and a story that is close to many people's hearts, and that is Genesis of the Daleks. You don't just have Sarah Jane, Harry, and the 4th Doctor, you have Davros, you have the beginnings of the Daleks, you have Time Lords, you've got this big, epic 6-parter. I mean, it was an episode that I knew I wanted on the list, and I hoped I could cut it down, but I did struggle to, so therefore I'm taking all 6 parts. And then we skip to season 14, and we're going to take The Deadly Assassin, but only episodes 3 and 4. This is because, at the end of episode 2, the Doctor goes into the Matrix, And I think the Matrix is the coolest part of that episode. Plus, part 1 is basically just, here's the Time Lord Society, and then here's, the assassination. Episode 2, we get into the Matrix, and then 3 and 4 are the most iconic bits with the Matrix, and of course then the Master stuff. So it's a shame that we didn't get a lot of the Time Lord bits at the beginning, but I had to make the space, and I think I took the best parts of the serial, because things like the Matrix and stuff like that obviously becomes incredibly important in our own personal histories with films such as The Matrix, and Doctor Who came up with that first, so really that should be preserved. And then talking about preserving stuff, I'd like to preserve my favourite classic episode of Doctor Who, and that is the Robots of Death. I'm going to take all 4 parts. I think the idea of organic versus machine is really cool. The episode's design is gorgeous, the outfits and everything like that. I think it's just a very iconic story and one that has to come with me.
And now we move into the 5th Doctor era and we take Earthshock, but we only take the final 3 episodes. It's a beautiful Cybermen story with the emotional beats resonating as recently as The Power of the Doctor. Then we take the 5 Doctors because, of course, it's a big anniversary episode. And then we round off the 5th Doctor's era with the case of Androzani. But as much as it breaks my heart, I'm only taking the final episode, just so you get that beautiful moment of the 5th Doctor running through the quarry as explosions go off and he gets beaten up. I think that's just absolutely brilliant, but I could not fit the rest of the episodes, I'm afraid. I'm so sorry, 6th Doctor fans, but there's really not much 6th Doctor on my list. I'm taking Attack of the Cybermen, but only part 2, because part 2 is where the real meat of the story happens, and I'm going to be taking Revelation of the Daleks, part 1 and part 2. So I'm really sticking to the headlines with taking a Cyberman and a Dalek story. I wanted to put in a darker left field story from the 6th Doctor, but as I kept reviewing the list, I realised that it didn't really fit. If you're looking back on some of the, maybe not the best, but the ones that can define Doctor Who, Daleks and Cybermen are the best thing to go for. And then we crash into the 7th Doctor with taking one of the best episodes of Classic Who, and that is Remembrance of the Daleks. It's a crazy story. There are plenty of cool shots of the Daleks. It's really enjoyable start to finish, so it had to come with me. All 4 parts, in fact. Then, along the same lines, I've taken The Curse of Fenwick. It beautifully encapsulates the relationship between Ace the Doctor, this darker side to the Doctor, and some of the more tonally darker stories that Sylvester McCoy had. And of course, now we're wrapping up the classic era of the show, I have to take the final story, and that is Survival. But I'm only taking the final part, mostly for historical value than anything else.
So that's all of Classic Who done, and we're more than halfway through the list. We're now on place 59, and that place is, of course, gonna go to Rose. I mean, do I really need to say any more than that? I mean, you've got Autons, you've got Russell T Davies, you've got Christopher Eccleston. I mean, it's no brainer.
Of course, it's very important that we take Dalek because it shows a lot of the fallout of the Time War. It shows Christopher Eccleston's acting chops, and a story about one Dalek taking on essentially a hired army is something everyone wants to see, right? And then we have a couple of definitive episodes from the 9th Doctor era. Father's Day, a beautiful story about Rose's dad, followed by a big 2-parter, The Empty Child and the Doctor Dances, written by Stephen Moffat. And of course, rounding off the 9th Doctor's era, we have The Parting of the Ways, in which he regenerates. And now we start off David Tennant's era with the first Christmas special, The Christmas Invasion, and then we jump to School Reunion for the episode with Sarah Jane in order to sort of tie into the spin-off. And then my favourite stories, The Rise of the Cybermen and The Age of Steel, a really big 2-parter that for me encapsulates a lot of what I love about Doctor Who, as well of course being the first appearance in New Who for the Cybermen. At position number 69, nice, it's Doomsday. Now this was a painful sacrifice. I really wanted both episodes of the Series 2 finale, but in the end had to settle for just one. We move on to one of the best Christmas specials, The Runaway Bride, a very important episode in Doctor Who's history because it features Donna Noble. I took a very iconic and beloved story from Series 3, and that is Human Nature and the Family of Blood. What an amazing script, what an amazing episode. This just is one of those fan favourite stories. And also a fan favourite story is the finale to Series 3. I've taken all 3 episodes because it's really a 3-parter at the end of the day. Next we have Voyage of the Damned, arguably the best Christmas special. And of course, in my personal opinion anyway, the best 2-parter in the form of The Stolen Earth and Journey's End. This episode is compared a lot to like an endgame of the RTD era, so I feel like this is just paramount to have.
And now we've essentially reached the end of David Tennant's time on the show, but we have one more place for him, and that is for the End of Time Part 2. I've only taken Part 2 because I feel like Part 1 is a lot more meandering, and Part 2 is when the nitty-gritty of stuff really begins to take effect. It would have been nice to take both parts, but then again, this is where the important stuff is. This is where the drama is, I suppose, even if it's a little bit soap opera. It needed to come with us. It's important for historical usages, and of course, in my life personally, that loss of the 10th Doctor was huge on me. And then we move into another iconic episode of Doctor Who, and that is the 11th Hour. For a lot of people, this was their first proper regeneration, so Matt Smith had a lot to live up to, and I think it really delivered. I think that the 11th Hour is the best post-regeneration episode.
Let's jump to an episode that will make you cry, and that episode is Vincent and the Doctor. It's a beautiful script, a very unconventionally written episode of Doctor Who. Sure, the monster is a little bit lame, but the episode's heart is really there. There's a reason why the gallery scene is the most watched video on the Doctor Who YouTube channel. And then we'll finish off Series 5 with a brilliant finale, with the Pandorica opens and the Big Bang. The Pandorica opens is this huge atmospheric story with this brilliant cliffhanger, and the Big Bang with its beautiful use of time travel and time manipulation to make a really entertaining story. And then before Amy and Rory depart, I wanted to get an episode that encapsulates their relationship, and the best one that I feel does that is The Girl Who Waited. And on a similar idea, I wanted an episode that really personifies Season 7B, and the episode that really gets me excited for that half of the series, even though a lot of them are quite weak, is The Bells of St. John, which of course brings us in 2013, the 50th anniversary, and of course we're going to take Day of the Doctor, and then Time of the Doctor, because it's a very important regeneration story. And now we have 12 episodes left, and the first one is Deep Breath. Of course, we have the 12th Doctor's first story. There's lots of interesting ideas going on here, like the Clockwork Robot. But Capaldi's very different in his later seasons, so we're just going to take one more final story from Series 8, and that is Death in Heaven. We have Danny Pink, we have the Cybermen, but most importantly, we have Missy. And of course, we move on to Series 9, and we take a nice all-rounder two-parter, and that is Under the Lake and Before the Flood. It's an episode that deals with ghosts and aliens. It's just really fun to watch. And of course, we need to show off how good Capaldi is in the role, so we need to take one of his best episodes, Heaven Sent. The fact he was able to carry that episode solely by himself is beautiful. And talking about episodes that are quite isolated, we're also going to be taking World Enough and Time. One, because I think it's one of Moffat's best scripts, but it also means that we get to delve into the tragedy of Bill. And of course, Capaldi's final episode has to be The Doctor Falls, because I'm not messing around with Twice Upon a Time. It is, of course, the big payoff to the Missy arc, the 12th Doctor. It has John Sim, Mondasian Cybermen. It is bonkers, man.
And so, with 5 places left, we've reached the 13th Doctor era. And this was a challenge because there was a lot I wanted to bring with me here, and there was many that I just threw immediately out of the list. And with 5 positions left, of course we're going to take The Woman Who Fell to Earth, Jodie's first story. And then we're going to take a historical episode like no other, and that episode is Rosa. I think Rosa is going to be looked back on as one of the highlights of Jodie's era, and I think that the story must be preserved for its interesting historical nature, but it's a historical in many respects, and then it is almost ruined by the fact they're like throwing in alien racists. Then we're going to have another episode from the past, and I think it's probably one of the best of Series 11, and that is Demons of the Punjab. It's a story I didn't really like to begin with, but if you didn't like it before, I suggest you give it another watch, because I watched it again recently, and I did actually quite enjoy it. There's a very nice emotional centre to this episode. Next, I have tried to preserve episodes that I feel include iconic villains, so of course the Daleks, the Cybermen, that kind of stuff, and I thought I would have to take a Dalek Jodie story with me, and that story I decided on was Resolution. It's one of the Dalek specials that Chibnall did. The second one has some very strange elements, and as much as I enjoy it, I don't think it particularly works, but this story focuses a lot on this singular Dalek, and that's why I feel like showing the strength of just one over an army of them is quite cool, and it also calls back to Dalek. So I think that kind of parallel works quite nicely, so that's why I'd like to take Resolution. And of course we're going to take a Cyberman episode, and if you cut off the Timeless Child sort of arc that comes into the end of this trilogy, it works quite well, because originally I did take the trilogy for historical purposes, but I'm just going to take The Haunting of Villa Diodati because the idea of a Cyberman on the night that Mary Shelley came up with Frankenstein is brilliant. And I think it's one of those things where if you take away the actual other 2 episodes, I think this episode would absolutely thrive and people would be so excited to see what would happen in the next 2 parts. And for me personally, the other 2 parts end up ruining what would have been a really brilliant episode. And finally, 100th place has to go to the most recent episode of Doctor Who, and of course, Jodie's regeneration, the power of the Doctor. I mean, this story kind of has everything. It has returning companions, Daleks, Cybermen, the Master, David Tennant. Like, when I looked at the list, I knew that this episode had to come with me. It has historical value, but it is probably Chibnall's best script, and it's just one hell of a ride. So it just was paramount to bring this story. And so that's me done. That's 100 episodes of Doctor Who. That was quite a list and quite a lot of filming. But anyway, I do hope you enjoyed it. What would your list be? Would your list differ massively? Did you agree with a lot of my decisions, or would you strongly disagree? Did I include your favourite episode? Please don't get too personal about it. It's just a simulation. Originally had like 250 placements, and obviously I had to cut that down over weeks. And each time I'd go back to it and just take out a few, and kind of the hard decisions I had to make. And there was a whole bunch of episodes like Fugitive and The City of Death and all types of stuff like that that I just wanted to keep. But yeah, it's an incredibly difficult challenge. If you'd like to do this, do have a go. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure you give a like, subscribe if you're new, and I shall see you soon. Goodbye.